We're back with some breaking news right now out of Minneapolis, where a shooting has occurred involving federal law enforcement. I want to go right to MS Now national reporter Alex Tabbitt, who's there on the scene. Alex, what's happening there right now?
Well, Anna, we are here in Minneapolis. There's a tense exchange between protesters and law enforcement, both state and local law enforcement, and also ICE agents. We just recently saw a tweet from the city of Minneapolis that reads, "We are aware of a shooting involving federal law enforcement near 34th Street and Portland Avenue." That is where we are right now, Anna. We've also been talking to an eyewitness. That eyewitness tells us that that person saw or heard 2 gunshots. You might be able to hear something from that eyewitness. I want you to hear what that eyewitness had to say. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. We'll have that ready for you shortly. But what we've been seeing since these reports of this shooting, since this tweet of the city of Minneapolis, is a highly, highly contentious situation between the protesters here and between the law enforcement. We also talked to another eyewitness who did not tell me that he saw the shooting itself, but he did tell me that he saw a car with blood spattered on the airbag. He showed me a video and a picture. It was quite gruesome. So obviously, Anna, this is a quickly developing situation. We still have a lot more to learn, a lot more to confirm, but the tensions are high here in Minneapolis. Anna?
Yeah, we can feel the emotion, and we're just looking at these live images. Quite a law enforcement presence there. Alex, do you know anything about this neighborhood, and specifically what law enforcement is there on scene? Is this all our immigration officials there? Is it other type of law enforcement that were taking action leading up to this shooting?
So, Anna, we actually just saw Greg Bovino, who is leading this immigration raid for Border Patrol, on the scene here. We also know that leading up to this report of this shooting, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, Border Patrol was conducting a raid. Mr. Osman, that's Jamal Osman, a city council member. But basically, we heard that there were ICE raids, immigration raids up and down this block. We're in communication with a number of people who are known as ICE verifiers. ICE verifiers, they patrol where immigration officials are patrolling and try to let the community member know where they are, try to keep other community members safe of a potential immigration crackdown. And what we've been told from them, at least, Anna, and I have to couch what I'm saying here, it's important that they're the ones who are telling me this, is that this street, this area, is where a lot of the immigration raids in the last few days has been happening. Anna?
Alex, we talked to you last hour about some of the fraud allegations involving members of the Somali community and many others in the Minnesota community at large. What can you tell us about that neighborhood specifically, and do you know anything about the population in that neighborhood?
What I can tell you is that for about a month now, since President Trump called the Somali diaspora here in Minnesota garbage, tensions have been just ratcheting up every single week. You can feel the tension now, obviously, coming to a crescendo at this moment. We're about 10 minutes away from the largest Somali mall in Minneapolis. It's a hub for the Somali community here. And ever since this rhetoric began, ever since this immigration crackdown began about a month ago and was kicked up a notch by the Trump administration in the last couple of days, the tension has only gotten higher, and the anxiety and the fear that the Somali diaspora, some 81,000 members of the Somali diaspora here in Minnesota, they're feeling less and less safe. And with reports like what we at least have heard today from the city of Minneapolis, it's easy to understand why. Now, as you can hear, or let's go over here because we're hearing a little bit of flowery language on the megaphone there, but it's really hit a boiling point right now. Anna, there is so much xenophobic rhetoric. There is so much anti-immigrant rhetoric, all in the midst in what DHS is calling the largest DSH operation in their history. Secretary Noem announced that some 2,000 additional agents have been surged into the Twin Cities just in the last couple of days. And that, all of that, the confluence of that is bringing us to the moment that we're living in right now. Anna?
Okay, Alex Tabbitt, thank you so much. Do keep us posted as things develop there. I know you're going to work to gather more information about this apparent shooting. I do want to mention we're seeing from Governor Walz of Minnesota right now a statement on X saying my public safety team is working to gather information on an ICE-related shooting this morning. We'll share information as we learn more. In the meantime, I ask folks to remain calm.
We collectively are going to do everything possible to get to the bottom of this, to get justice, and to make sure that there is an investigation that is conducted in full. But what we do know is that a 37-year-old woman is dead and that she was shot by ICE. We've dreaded this moment since the early stages of this ICE presence in Minneapolis. Not only is this a concern that we've had internally, we've been talking about it. They are not here to cause safety in this city. What they are doing is not to provide safety in America. What they are doing is causing chaos and distrust. They're ripping families apart. They're sowing chaos on our streets. And in this case, quite literally killing people. So they are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. This was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying, getting killed. As soon as it happened and we learned of the incident, we had several priorities. The first, of course, was to get the victim to the hospital and to get care as soon as possible. And to the family, I'm so deeply sorry. There's nothing that I can say right now that's going to make you or your relatives or the friends of the victim feel any better. There were, I believe, 2 Minneapolis police officers that responded and were in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. The second was to get ICE off of the scene. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of ICE and federal officers that were there at the time. Having them there was only causing more chaos. Having them there was only making a difficult situation even more problematic, and one that, yes, they created themselves. There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the fuck out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite. People are being hurt. Families are being ripped apart. Long-term Minneapolis residents that have contributed so greatly to our city, to our culture, to our economy are being terrorized, and now somebody is dead. That's on you. And it's also on you to leave. It's on you to make sure that further damage, further loss of life and injury is not done. We're going to be working towards justice as quickly as we possibly can right now, and justice is what we've all got to get. Next, a message to our community. Look, we all know that the agenda of this Trump administration is to create chaos. Let us respond right now with our best versions of self. This is a moment where all of us in Minneapolis and beyond, we can rise to the occasion. We can show them who we are. We can show them the kind of courage, bravery, love, and compassion that makes Minneapolis, Minneapolis, and that makes America, America. We are better than a bunch of ICE agents being deployed to cities around the country and ripping apart families and communities. We're better than that. And so we are going to meet that hate with love. We are going to meet that despair with hope. We are going to meet that injustice with constitutional justice ourselves. And we're going to make sure that in this very difficult moment, we do not take the bait that these ICE agents are trying to create and that the federal government, to be clear, wants. They want us to respond in a way that creates a military occupation in our city. They want an excuse to come in and show the kind of force that will create more chaos and more despair. Let's not let them. Let's rise to this occasion. Let's show them something far more beautiful than the kind of division that they're trying to stoke. Let's show them unity of purpose, of love, and the courage of our conviction. Our conviction, to be clear, is rock solid, and it is for our neighbors, all of our neighbors. It's for people who have lived here for 80 years. It is for new immigrants who have made this city a better place. That's the kind of love that we're going to show up with right now. If you're angry, I get it. I am too. If you're feeling that kind of despair, it's understandable. Let's show them who we can be. Let's show up with peace. To march, to protest, to hug one another, to love all the way with peace. Do not give them what they want. Finally, we've got a lot of work that needs to happen right now to make sure that, first, of course, the scene was secured as much as possible, that we were able to get the victim, now deceased, to the hospital. We've got a lot of work to do in the coming days. I want to thank our city enterprise for the work that they have done, but more importantly, what they're about to do, because this is going to be heavy, and our city has been through a lot. We also know that we're prepared to do right for people. Among them is our chief of police. And I'll invite him up.
My name is Brian O'Hara, B-R-I-A-N-O''H-A-R-A. I am the Minneapolis Police Chief. This morning, Minneapolis police officers received a report of federal law enforcement being involved in a deadly force incident, meaning shots had been fired. Minneapolis police officers responded to the scene. We arrived and found a woman with a gunshot wound to the head. Life-saving measures were performed at the scene, including CPR. The woman was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center, where she has since been pronounced deceased. The preliminary information that we have indicates that this woman was in her vehicle and was blocking the roadway on Portland Avenue, midway between 33rd Street and 34th Street in the city. At some point, a federal law enforcement officer approached her on foot, and the vehicle began to drive off. At least 2 shots were fired. The vehicle then crashed on the side of the roadway. Minneapolis police officers secured the crime scene and assisted in trying to preserve the evidence that is there. We have since turned over the scene both to the Federal Bureau of Investigation as well as the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which will be conducting an investigation into this use of deadly force. I want to thank the mayor, city council president, other members of the city council, state legislators that were on the scene. This has been a very difficult time for everyone in the city. And this is obviously a very, very tragic situation where a woman has lost her life. That being said, in addition to this tragedy, which unfortunately we did predict, we were seriously concerned about further escalation from the scene. And I want to thank the elected officials that came themselves to help us prevent that from happening, as well as the individuals on that scene that remained peaceful and that abided by law enforcement instructions so that we could preserve that scene and ensure that a full and transparent investigation can take place. That being said, I just echo the mayor's comments that we ask that the community continue to call for peace. We understand people are going to be upset about what happened, and people are going to want to exercise their First Amendment rights. But please do so safely and lawfully to ensure that we do not have any further tragedy in this city or destruction. Thank you.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Tonight, thousands of people have gathered in the streets of Minneapolis and other places around the country in protest. A 37-year-old American citizen, the mother of a young child, is dead tonight. She was shot in the face by an agent of the federal government, and that government has spent the day telling despicable lies about her. The highest officials in the land slandering the victim as a domestic terrorist, running cover for their agents' actions before the earliest details were even available. Her name, identified by the Star Tribune, is Renee Nicole Good. She was the driver of a vehicle in an area where ICE was conducting operations as part of a surge of enforcement ordered by Donald Trump. The government wants you to believe this 37-year-old mother of a young child conducted a ramming attack against the agents, but by now you have probably seen the extremely disturbing video that shows what really happened. We don't know exactly what happened right before that video. We don't have video before that. We do know what happened after. Photos of the aftermath show an incredibly disturbing scene, including this photo of a bloody airbag right next to the stuffed animals in the glove compartment. This is what our government is calling a domestic terrorist. One witness said that a doctor on the scene immediately attempted to help that woman, but ICE blocked him. The Trump administration has responded how they almost always respond in situations like this, by lying. In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security said that a, quote, violent rioter, quote, weaponized her vehicle, attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism. An ICE officer, fearing for his life, the lives of his fellow law enforcement, and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots, adding, quote, the ICE officers who were hurt are expected to make full recoveries. Donald Trump took things a step further, saying the deceased woman, quote, violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer, who seems to have shot her in self-defense. Based on the attached clip, it's hard to believe he is alive, but is now recovering in the hospital. Well, you just watched the attached clip. You just watched the video. And you can decide what you believe. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem already claimed she knew a definitive motive for the victim, despite the fact we still knew almost nothing about her.
It was an act of domestic terrorism. What happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle. An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively shot to protect himself and the people around him. And my understanding is that she was hit and is deceased. We're continuing to gather more information, but this goes to show the assaults that our ICE officers and our law enforcement are under every single day.
Consider that video. Was she attacking him? Was she the one initiating aggressive action? Was she the one being aggressive? As Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz noted today, they decided on a narrative and then just spouted out the conclusions immediately.
Hi, Holt. Maybe we're at the McCarthy moment. Do you have no decency? Do you have no decency? We have someone dead in their car for no reason whatsoever, and I don't want to be right about this, but I said if they do this, they're going to create a chaotic situation where someone innocent's going to get killed, and they did it. And now we hear more political rhetoric. Enough is enough. It's unprecedented that we have the federal government's already determined exactly what's happened here and the motives of an individual that we don't even know the name. They don't know the name.
Of course, we later learned the name, Renee Nicole Good's name. After she was killed, and this administration had already labeled her a domestic terrorist, a woman who had attacked and tried to run over and kill ICE officers. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey was even more blunt in his assessment, directing some very strong language at this administration.
They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the f*** out of Minneapolis.
It must be said that this response from DHS and the White House fits a very, very established pattern at this point. Last October, ICE tackled a local Chicago journalist to the ground while she was walking to a bus stop. She was handcuffed, put in a van, detained. DHS claimed she assaulted agents by throwing an object at them, but she was released that same day without being charged. Does it seem like that's the kind of thing that would happen if she actually assaulted the agents, that they would release her without charges? In that clip we just showed, when California Democratic Senator Alex Padilla was tackled to the ground after trying to ask Kristi Noem a question at a press event back in June. Remember that? ICE claimed they believed the sitting senator to be an attacker who lunged at the secretary, but the incident was captured on video. And that narrative just doesn't seem to be true. The senator clearly identified himself. He's not seen lunging at anyone. Those are two examples. I could go on and on for an hour here. I mean, they've tried to get grand juries to indict people for assaulting ICE officers and CBP people, and they've gotten no true bill. They couldn't convict the guy that chucked the Subway sandwich at a DHS official a foot away because their credibility is so shot. There's none left. But none of their lies and spin can change the fact that a woman, a mother, an American, is now dead. In many ways, this moment is painfully familiar for the city of Minneapolis. Renee Nicole Good was killed just blocks from where a police officer murdered George Floyd 5 years ago. And that murder, of course, also captured on a phone camera, led to the largest mass uprising for racial justice in a generation, by some accounts ever. And tonight, people are once again taking the streets of Minneapolis in protest. Governor Walz has urged them to remain peaceful, to not give this administration an excuse to suppress dissent or expand its militarized occupation of American cities. It has long been a concern that ICE would provoke a mass mobilization in response to their presence on American streets, and then Trump would use that as a pretext to invoke the Insurrection Act. We know he has even mused about shooting protesters in the past. Right now, the city of Minneapolis and the whole country is reeling from yet another tragedy, a death that was, as the governor said correctly, entirely preventable, at the hands of masked agents directed by Donald Trump.
Here was Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey earlier today. Fair warning, he uses some curse words very appropriately here.
They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. This was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying. There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the fuck out of Minneapolis.
Very well stated there. Joining me now is the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey. I've been thinking today, as so many of us have been, about the city of Minneapolis. And the last time we spoke, it was in the wake of the shooting at Annunciation Catholic School. And many people in the community knew Melissa Hortman and her husband. And I just can't imagine what the city has been going through over the last 6 months, and you've been leading it. So help us first just understand. I know you've been spending time with people in the community. How is the community doing tonight?
You got to understand that obviously Minneapolis has been through so much, not just over the last year, but over the last 5. But we are tough, we are strong, we are resilient. We'll get knocked down 7 times, but we get back up 8. And when somebody comes for one of us, they're coming for all of us. And that's exactly what is happening here. You've got these thousands of ICE agents that are coming in, not for safety reasons, not for fighting crime. They're coming in to terrorize our communities. And what you see right now, and I think what you'll continue to see throughout the presence of ICE, is we're going to grin down this bear. We're going to fight for justice. We're going to do everything possible that we can to stand up for each other. And we're also going to do it peacefully. We understand that right now, the Trump administration is looking for any excuse whatsoever to deploy the military, an occupying force, even more ICE agents or border control. We're not going to give them that excuse. Of course, we speak out. We express our First Amendment rights. We stand up for our neighbors. And I think we all realize right now, both in our city administration but throughout our entire residency, we all know what's at stake.
We just showed some images of what appear to be large-scale peaceful protests tonight. In response, we have reporters on the ground who, of course, covering them. Tell us what the scale of those are. What are you hearing about what's happening on the ground? How did they originate?
Well, look, I won't speak to the work that those that have been organizing is doing right now. I won't speak to that. What I will say is there is a broad message that is going out, and that message is pretty clear, which is don't take the bait. We'll stand up for justice. We'll stand up for what is right. And we also recognize what the Trump administration is trying to do here, because it appears that they wanted a moment like this. The chief and I have been saying, not just privately, but publicly for over a month, that something like this was going to happen. Either a civilian, a resident, a police officer, or even an ICE agent was going to get shot, killed, or very badly injured. And look, it happened. And no, it did not happen because our community member is a domestic terrorist. It didn't happen because they went through what appeared to be like a 3 or a 4-point turn. That's the furthest thing from any intentional use of force that I could possibly imagine. This happened because the way that ICE is conducting themselves is not constitutional. This happened because you got people that are coming into our city, tearing apart communities, really hurting a whole lot of small and local businesses, dragging pregnant women through the street, and then detaining people simply because they look Somali or look Latino. And so to the extent you've got people that want to document the horrific stuff and the unconstitutional conduct that is taking place, yeah, I get it. We should be adding a little bit of sunlight to disinfect what's going on with this federal administration. And I hope that the call here is not just to Minneapolis residents, but anybody who's watching throughout the country, Republican or Democrat. You know, this is about the endurance of our republic right now. This is about having the courage of our convictions to say, you know what, this is not who we are. To find those better angels, to do right by our society, and to make sure that when people come for our immigrant community, our country's made up of immigrants and we stand by them.
We wouldn't know what happened today without citizen activism and without citizens recording from many angles. It's kind of incredible. That's how we know how many of these things happen. You called the Trump administration's portrayal of what happened today BS. I think I just tried to outline why it's BS. We showed the video. I think a lot of people watching have watched this video. This is your community. I mean, what stuck out most to you specifically when you watched that video this morning?
Well, I won't preempt the investigation that is going to take place in part through the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. But look, I got two eyes. I saw the video that all of you saw as well. The notion that this was domestic terrorism is garbage. It's BS. It's whatever other superlative you want to attach. But that ain't a factual or valid narrative. And we should all just be acknowledging, the truth. The truth matters here. And our call has been twofold. Our call has been first, ICE, get out of our city. Second, to our community members, this is our moment to meet a whole lot of hate with a whole lot of love. This is our moment to do everything possible that we're pushing for justice when you got an administration that is seemingly trying to deny it. This is our moment to show who we can be right now. And I'm confident that we can do so peacefully. I'm confident that we can express those First Amendment rights without hurting each other or the communities that have been built up so beautifully over the last several years. And I'm optimistic about this city, and at the same time, we're devastated for the family. We're devastated for the victim. And of course, our city's reeling.
We still, the victim here is such an important part of this story, of course. We still know very little about her. We know her name is Renee Nicole Good and that she was 37 years old. I heard the lieutenant governor say she had a 6-year-old child. Have you learned more about her?
I have not learned enough about her yet. We are in the process. I got my staff, looking for a contact, and obviously, look, we got to be wrapping our arms around the family, around Renee's friends. We got to be doing everything possible right now to show them the kind of love that they deserve, because they do not deserve this.
There have been, I mentioned this a little bit in the opening, and we've covered this on this show a bit, these kind of incredible efforts in cities like Minneapolis and Los Angeles and Chicago of citizen activism, basically warning people about ICE operations, trying to keep people, community members, safe. Reportedly, there was an effort like that happening in this community today, with whistles being blown. People were saying they were arriving to the community because of that. Have you learned any more about whether that was why she was there?
I don't know enough information to comment on that yet. I certainly wouldn't be surprised that she was standing up for her neighbors, because from the little that I have learned about her, that is something that she would do on a very regular basis. I wouldn't be surprised when any of the residents throughout our city would say, you know what, we care about you, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what zip code you grew up in. You come to Minneapolis, you contribute greatly to this city, you start small and local businesses. Hey, you're part of Minneapolis, and you make it a better place. And that's one of the most frustrating things that we've seen from these ICE agents is, again, they are not here to drive down crime or create safety. By the way, we have worked with a number of different federal agencies and departments in the past to significantly drive down crime. Crime in virtually every category, in virtually every neighborhood throughout the city of Minneapolis is down pretty substantially right now. And so if we're talking about safety, we're on board. That's not what this is about. This is about terrorizing people. If they cared about safety, they wouldn't be going after the dad that just dropped his kids off at daycare, is about to go work a 12-hour shift, who happens to be from Somalia or Ecuador. They'd be focused on violent criminals that do horrific things. And so, as Democrats, we got to be very clear-eyed. We are anti-crime. Mm-hmm. We are pro-safety. We're also pro-abiding by the Constitution, which this administration is not doing.
And the majority of people they're deporting through some of these processes don't have criminal records, which is important to continue to restate. Let me ask you about the accountability, because I know you've said, ICE, get out of my city. I think other mayors like yourself feel that way. And when you're in the wake of a tragedy like this morning, it's so understandable to hear that. I think a lot of people feel that. Your chief of police said tonight that the investigation into this shooting will be handled jointly by the FBI and state law enforcement. we're just in this crazy period of time. I don't have to tell you, you've been speaking out about this.
Yeah.
Where you have the President of the United States, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, the Attorney General. They are all essentially spewing lies about what happened this morning. What is your expectation about whether the FBI is going to handle this investigation with the level of thoroughness and fairness that it warrants?
My understanding is that the investigation will be conducted both by the FBI, but also the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension at the state level. And look, I don't think anybody knows fully what to expect from this administration. And I'm not going to venture a guess at this point. But what I will say is that I believe my own eyes. I will say that, the way that our law enforcement officers here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, are conducting is going to be fair and righteous. I mean, we had 2 cops that were on the scene in a minimal amount of time. They were in the ambulance with the victim on the way to the hospital. We've done a lot of work over these last 5 years to improve our police department, to be the change. And right now, we've got officers that have both stayed and that are coming on board that want to be an example for so many others to follow. We've got immigrant communities, more and more, that are saying, hey, I trust the Minneapolis Police Department. You know who I don't trust? These ICE agents that are coming in with black vests that are unmarked, that aren't taking responsibility for their own actions. This is yet another instance of it, and sadly, it's not unexpected. The chief and I have been talking about this for over a month, that this was a strong likelihood or a possibility, and tragically it happened. The way they're behaving is reckless, it's not constitutional, and everybody should be speaking out about it.
We will certainly continue to do that. And I know in days like this, there is nothing that eases people's pain, but I'm sure having somebody who's leading their city speaking out is powerful. Unedited, too, I think is important. Mayor Jacob Frey, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So I just want to tell folks what we're looking at here. This is neighboring St. Paul, where there are clashes taking place right now. Live pictures. Protesters are clashing with what appears to be ICE agents, and it appears that the protesters are trying to enter a federal building, and they are
well, right now, these images obviously are police officers are surrounding and keeping, officers are keeping them on the ground. John?
Yeah, we will keep an eye on this. But clearly a heated clash here. And this has been a concern all along. Minneapolis and St. Paul, right across the river, have been a bit of a powder keg. We know that, of course, is where George Floyd was killed in 2020. It's, there's been ICE operations stepped up in recent weeks. The Trump administration has really levied accusations about fraud, singling out the Somali community in recent days. And now we are seeing these significant protests the day after the shooting of a woman in her car. John Sandwig, as we keep an eye on these images, I wanted to ask you to take a step back, not about this specific incident, but you're a former acting ICE director. There's been questions raised this morning about the training, about the readiness of ICE agents and Border Patrol agents who are used to doing very different operations along the border as opposed to urban areas like Minneapolis. Do you have worries that these men and women simply aren't prepared to do the job they've been asked to do?
Absolutely. I have very strong concerns about what we're doing tactically. We've put ICE officers in the position to do things they weren't trained to do. They're not part of their core mission. We've pulled U.S. Border Patrol agents who are trained to interdict individuals in remote areas where the rules of engagement are the same, but the threats they face are so radically different. And we put them up in urban areas like Minneapolis. And really, these videos that we're seeing now are very concerning to me because it's ICE and Border Patrol agents who just have no training and experience in doing crowd control or public order policing, who are now, which is delicate, but also they're the target themselves of the protesters' ire. It just has a tendency to inflame the situation and escalate. I feel like the administration, Listen, I think that you could have taken a position where here we want to de-escalate this situation, issue the proper statement, have the secretary say there will be a full investigation, we'll get maximum transparency, lower the profile of the agency in the city itself. Unfortunately, I think it seems like the administration wants to steer the other way. The secretary herself returned to Minneapolis, doubled down on the defense of both the operation itself, but also what happened with the shooting. All of that is, unfortunately, is not about de-escalation, but rather the opposite. It seems it's going to just further tensions, and I'm worried about what's going to happen in the coming days.
Well, and this right here, these live pictures that we're looking at out of St. Paul, this is exactly what the governor and governors and mayors across the country have been warning about. This type of tension between ICE and the community. ICE, that many would argue, are not trained well enough in general, armed, and not trained to deal with these specific communities, not in sync with the local police and with local officials, with no connectivity and no communication about exactly what they're doing to, quote, make America safer. And then you have the community here worried about their friends and neighbors, rightfully so. After people are being disappeared across the country, people are being hurt, people are being separated from their families, whether illegal, going through the process, or American citizens. It's happening to all types of people who are in this country. There is fear, there is anger. And now, after yesterday, one could argue there's no question there's chaos.
Yesterday's deadly shooting was just the latest in a string of violence that's been committed by ICE agents since Donald Trump's immigration crackdown started, really since Donald Trump's second term started. The Trace, which is a group that investigates gun violence in America, found that since Trump's immigration crackdown began, there have been 15 shootings during ICE operations. They include the shootings of 3 people observing or documenting ICE raids, the shootings of 5 people driving away from traffic stops or evading an enforcement action, and the September 30th raid on a Chicago apartment building, during which half-asleep tenants and their children were held at gunpoint. At least 4 people have been killed and 5 others have been injured. The Department of Homeland Security has consistently defended agents who have used force, saying that they have acted in self-defense. This all comes in a year where DHS and the Trump administration have gone to really embarrassing standards, embarrassing for them, for the requirements for employment at ICE in an effort to boost recruitment and eligibility at the agency. The moves include lowering the age from 21 to 18, offering as much as $50,000 as a signing bonus to become an ICE agent. But that hasn't done the trick. It hasn't brought in the experience needed. According to Politico, just 4 in 10 candidates at the agency had prior law enforcement experience. I want to bring in former DHS Chief of Staff during Donald Trump's first term, Miles Taylor. Michael Feinberg is still here. Now, Miles, the embarrassing part is that you should have to be more fit than a middle-aged mom, and this is the fitness requirement. You have to do 15 push-ups, 32 sit-ups, and run 1.5 miles in 14 minutes. That is not the best of the best, going after what they described as the, quote, worst of the worst.
Yeah, it's not SEAL Team 6, Nicole. I mean, I guess you and I are both in. We could be ICE officers today if we want. But there's a couple things here that are problematic. I mean, one certainly is the size. I mean, ICE is now the largest federal law enforcement agency in America. It's bigger than the Army of most countries, and it's growing very rapidly. You note that the qualifications have been lowered, the training has been lowered, and as a result, we've got an agency fielding undertrained, underqualified, ideologically motivated federal officers to roam American cities. And they are armed with extraordinary authority from the top. And that's the thing that I think we really have to focus here on with what happened in Minnesota and what's happening everywhere else. Go back to July when Donald Trump melted down because protesters were vandalizing ICE vehicles. And he said these were brand new cars and it was totally disrespectful. And after that, he said he was directing the Secretary of Homeland Security to give, quote, total authorization to use, quote, whatever means necessary to go after these protesters. Those are the words from the president. And in the wake of what happened yesterday, Nicole, to a lot of Americans, this looks like the president has given them the license to kill. And the way they are defending those officers and defending this incident and turning it on the victim and absurdly trying to characterize it as domestic terror shows that they are giving full license to do whatever means necessary these agents determine is appropriate in any circumstance. This is precisely the type of thing the founders feared, is a personal police force accountable only to the president.
You were the chief of staff at DHS in Donald Trump's first term for General John Kelly, who became a harsh critic of Donald Trump's, warning the country ahead of last year's election of just what Donald Trump would do if reelected, and agreeing with other top generals that he was, quote, autocratic. That's sort of the technical definitions of an autocrat. Kristi Noem is a different cat. She wrote in her own book about an act that most people view as sadistic and cruel, shooting her puppy in the face. What is it? How important is it, or is it important, the character of the person that leads this agency?
It's crucially important. I mean, let's start with the president there. What John Kelly warned about has only come into sharper relief. Today, asked by the New York Times if Donald Trump thinks there are limits to his powers, he responded, and I'm barely paraphrasing, he said, "There's one thing, my own morality, my own mind, it's the only thing that can stop me." You cannot hear that and think anything other than John Kelly was right. That is the mind of a fascist. And who does a fascist hire to work under him? He hires like-minded people. Now, we saw an ICE officer fire shots yesterday that killed an American citizen. And today, instead of showing contrition or even caution, the White House and the Secretary of DHS continued to fire the gun. They continued to fire the gun by calling this domestic terrorism, and in doing so, creating a secondary public safety nightmare. I'll tell you this, Nicole, like Michael, I've responded to dozens of terrorist attacks. I've advised Donald Trump on the response to terrorist attacks. Hell, I co-wrote his counterterrorism strategy. And this was a woman in a Honda with stuffed animals in her glove box trying to leave a volatile scene. But now, by calling it domestic terrorism, Kristi Noem is creating the pretext for a further crackdown on the political opposition. That is scary, that is dystopian, and it tells you everything you need to know about the character of the people who are now running these agencies.
Meantime, we have breaking news. Brand new cell phone video we've just gotten in showing a very different angle of that deadly Minneapolis ICE shooting. This video was obtained by Alpha News. Apparently, it is actually from the cell phone of the ICE officer who shot Renee Good. The video has already been shared on social media by Vice President J.D. Vance and reposted by the White House. I want to warn you, you will hear some expletives in this video. We don't know who says them. And just generally, the video is disturbing.
Every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine. U.S. citizen. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Whoa! Good.
Back with us, Michael Feinberg, former special agent in charge with the FBI and an MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. This is very different from the videos we've seen before. What do you see from an investigative standpoint?
Frankly, law enforcement officers overreacting to what admittedly might be some sarcastic and lightly combative civilians, but I don't see a situation that would require the application of deadly force. You know, the reason law enforcement officers are supposed to be vetted before they join. And the reason they go through extensive training is that two of the qualities you need to exhibit the most are emotional maturity and an ability to keep your cool. And getting heckled, getting videotaped, anything related to those two activities, that's part of the job. Somebody filming you on a cell phone and giving you sass is not a threat to your life. It's not even a threat to your safety. It's a minor annoyance at best. And I'm also really curious, why on earth is a law enforcement officer filming an interaction with a civilian on his cell phone? They're not influencers. They're not social media posters. If you're there to do a job as an agent of the federal government, do the job. You don't need to be making content in the midst of it.
I don't want to make any presumptions, and I have not seen the posts that were made by J.D. Vance or by the White House, but I'm presuming they believe that this may support their argument that there was a reasonable belief, a justifiable belief on the part of the ICE officer that he was in danger. Do you see that?
No, I don't. And look, J.D. Vance was admittedly in the military, but he was in civil affairs. I don't know that he has any familiarity whatsoever with law enforcement procedures. And as far as I know, prior to becoming president, Donald Trump actively avoided all forms of public service whatsoever. So I'm quite sure he doesn't understand what goes into a law enforcement tactical decision. These are people who, not just reasons for propriety, but also for reasons of ignorance, really should not be commenting on any of this until there is a thorough, objective investigation.
Brandy, let me bring you back in. And I just wonder, as someone who has looked at some of this kind of investigative material before, if there's anything you see that's different from what we've seen in videos before, something that stands out to you, Brandy.
Well, one thing that stands out to me is the question that was just brought up: why is this person filming? And Ross did testify in December, at during the trial in December, that they do not wear cameras on their body. They do not wear body cam, and they do not have dashboard cams as well. Not saying that has anything to do, but they don't have cameras. So his cell phone would have possibly been the only camera he had. You know, I've seen a lot of these videos from every angle now, and I'm looking at J.D. Vance's tweet, and he says, you know, that many of you say that the officer wasn't hit by a car, wasn't being harassed, and I still don't see him being hit by a car or I think the woman said, I'm not mad at you. They seem to be, you know, generally sparring with him, which we see in these videos a lot. That's correct. This is part of the tactic of these ICE watchers to goad sometimes and to execute or to enjoy their rights as citizens to film and be on public streets and stuff like that. I think what is very clear to me is that no matter what videos come out, is that both sides have made up their mind with a narrative. One side seems a lot more supported by the facts to me.
Yeah, and I do wonder, we only have a minute left, but I wonder if, Michael, you see anything in this that people who are trying to figure it out, it might give them more insight. And again, we don't know who it came from, but somebody calling her an effing B.
Well, we know from other videos that was an ICE officer who did that. Look, this is the height of unprofessionalism. And if the officer who fired the shots was really in fear for his life, he has a lot of equipment to protect himself. But you generally want your hands free to be able to access that equipment. I spent a long time in law enforcement. There is never a situation where if I thought I was in danger, I would preoccupy one of my usable hands by taking a video of the person to whom I was talking. You want your hands free to respond to the situation. This is I'm sorry, but that excuse is asinine.
But I did want to start tonight with a new video of the shooting in question. Because today a right-wing outlet was the first to obtain and publish that video, which MS Now has now acquired as well. It is yet another angle of Wednesday morning's shooting, and this time, the video is from the perspective of a phone held by the shooter himself. And the right has quickly jumped on this new footage. I mean, they are all over it, claiming it somehow vindicates the ICE agent responsible for killing Renee Nicole Good earlier this week. They claim that because the shooter appears to fumble his camera and because you can hear a loud noise, that this video must be evidence that Renee Good ran over or hit the agent with her car. That is what they have been blasting everywhere. But if you look at all of the evidence we have seen so far, that does not appear to be the case, because so many people were filming this incident when it happened. We have a lot of footage that captured the scene from very different angles. And while I'm not a crime scene expert by any means, I certainly don't claim to be one. But when you put them all together, which we've tried to do here, the picture of what happened on Wednesday morning gets clearer. Now, DHS has said that the reason there was such a large ICE presence on that block to begin with was that an ICE vehicle had gotten stuck in the snow and other ICE vehicles had arrived to help get it out. Residents, seeing the large ICE presence, then began blowing whistles. You can hear them right there, to warn that ICE was there. And they also started to film. That's how we get a lot of this footage. So today's new video shows the shooter filming with his phone as he walks around Renee Nicole Good's maroon SUV. Good then tells the agent, "That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you."
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you.
Okay. You then see Good pull forward slightly, you can see it on your screen, and gesture for a vehicle to go around and pass her, which it does. From here, two things happen on opposite sides of the car simultaneously. The shooter continues circling the car. In the video on the left, you can see him filming the person who appears to be Good's wife as she films him and shouts at the officer. Now, in the video on the right, on the other side of the car, two more federal agents get out of this silver pickup truck and approach Good's car. Now, if you listen carefully, you can hear Good telling the agents to go around. Okay, after Good tells the agents to go around, they then told her, you could just hear that, to get the F out of the car. Good then backs her car up, away from the agents, apparently to leave. And today's new video shows her hands turning the steering wheel, clearly pointing the car in the opposite direction as the agents before she proceeds to drive. Forward, of course. And at the same point in the wider video, you can see that her wheels are already turned away from the agents as she begins to move forward. Okay, so that brings us to the piece of this new video the right has absolutely latched onto. A moment of impact of some kind in which the shooter's camera becomes unstable and shaky. And this is what many on the right say is evidence that the car hit the officer. So let's look at that moment on its own.
Out of the car.
So the right has seized on those 5 seconds where you can't see much because the officer kind of fumbles his phone to say that the car must have hit the agent who shot Good. They are claiming that that video vindicates the agent for firing those shots. But if you sync up that video with the other angle of that same moment, you can see that the car does not appear to run the agent over. In fact, the agent's feet are positioned away from the car. And as I mentioned, the car is already headed in the opposite direction. Now, let's just take a moment to watch that side by side at full speed, because a lot is happening at once during the course of only about 3 seconds. It happens very fast, 3 seconds, and it's obviously hard to catch everything that's going on. But you may notice that the moment that many on the right have attributed to the car hitting the agent, that moment occurs at virtually the same time he fires his first shot. And at the very same time, he fumbles his phone, which appears to be pressed up against his body. Now, both of those things happen almost simultaneously. So between the sound of the phone's microphone potentially rubbing against the agent's clothes and the muffled sound of the first gunshot, it's hard to say what we are actually hearing. In other words, the sound that the right has seized upon could very well be the sound of his phone against his body combined with the sound of that first gunshot. Also, I can't imagine that federal agents would be encouraged to use their cell phones while on duty, especially if they really thought that they were facing a life-threatening situation. Today's new video also reveals something that was said in the seconds after the shooting. And it involves some expletives, so if you have kids around and you want to hit mute for a second, this is your moment. I mean, we cannot say for certain if it is the shooter or another agent or just a bystander. But about 3 seconds after the shots are fired, you can hear this in the shooter's video.
Fucking bitch.
After he shot at her 3 times, after Good's car crashes into another car down the block, the agents do not appear to rush to her aid. They do not appear to be in any rush at all. The shooter eventually approaches the car and then slowly walks back to his fellow agents and tells them to call 911.
What did you do? You! Shame! 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 Shame!
Now later, someone who identifies themselves as a doctor offers to help, but the federal agents on the scene turn him away.
Can I go check a pulse?
No! Back up! Now!
I'm a physician!
Hey, listen, we understand. We got EMS coming. I get it. Just give us a second. We have medics on scene. We have our own medics.
Where are they? Where are they?
We have medics on the scene. That was one of the last things you heard one of the officers say. Well, it ultimately took more than 6 minutes before emergency medical personnel arrived. So medics were not, in fact, on the scene. Also, we at MS Now have not independently confirmed this, but the New York Times reports that several agents, including the shooter, then got in their vehicles and drove away, leaving an active crime scene, leaving a 37-year-old mother of 3 that one of their officers had shot 3 times. Renee Nicole Good told those officers, "I'm not mad at you." That's the woman the Trump administration called a domestic terrorist. That's the woman whose killing Vice President J.D. Vance called a tragedy of her own making. And all this new video does is make clear that those claims are just as disgusting and ridiculous as they were before we saw this new video. She said, "I'm not mad at you." And 25 seconds after she uttered those words, she was shot.
And we are beginning the hour with MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt in Minneapolis, where hundreds are protesting against ICE, that which happened in their backyard. Alex, what are you hearing from Minneapolis residents today?
That's right, Alex. It's absolutely frigid here, about 20 degrees 5 with a wind chill, but that's not stopping hundreds, if not thousands of people making it out here to both commemorate the life of 37-year-old Renee Good, but also protest ICE. ICE, which is in the middle of a historic immigration crackdown here in Minneapolis, which the Trump administration has only double and triple down on since this tragedy on Wednesday. And now, as you can see, this protest is beginning with an indigenous ritual to pay homage to the immigrant history of this country. Incense are filling the air. People are holding flags from countries from around the world. Now, Alex, I want to introduce you to one of the protesters here. Her name is Brianna. She's a high school teacher here in the Minneapolis area. Brianna, why are you here today?
Murder is wrong. And it's as simple as that. ICE agents around here, it's painful to see all this happening. To our communities, to our students, to our just everybody. It's very frustrating.
And you mentioned the students. You're a high school teacher. Can you talk to me about the impact that the killing of Renee Good has had on the students you teach, and also the impact of the immigration raids on that young community?
Well, when everything kind of went down, we were told to keep it under wraps just because we want to keep our children and our students feeling like they're safe and that this is not something that they should be distracting them from classes and learning on Wednesday. But then, I mean, we've had students, parents, and even some students be deported. We've had things like that. I mean, parents are self-deporting too at times. This is awful, to be completely honest. It's also hard to know that I've got students who aren't coming to school because they're afraid of being picked up by ICE. I've had friends of mine, they're saying that they as teachers or parents are being followed by ICE agents. And how does that help our communities stay safe? How does this help any of us do well when we could be using these resources somewhere else that would actually benefit us?
Miranda, thank you so much. And Alex, as you can hear, we're hearing the chants of Renee Good by hundreds, if not thousands, in this crowd in Minneapolis. Alex?
Yep, we can see it both with you and also we can see it from the air with this drone footage. It is, it's a growing group, becoming more boisterous. And as you said, Alex, very tragically, they're calling out the name Renee Good. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Alex, and thank Brianna for the interview as well. So for more on the nationwide outcry over the ICE shooting, let's go to MS Now's Laura Hafley, who is joining us from New York City. So, Laura, what's happening there? Because we know vigils and rallies have sprung up beyond Minneapolis. What are protesters there telling you, and what more can we expect this weekend?
Yeah, Alex, that's right. We're seeing protests erupt all across the country, including right here in New York City, where this group of independent protesters behind me are standing in the shadow of federal immigration court just a couple blocks away from City Hall. And of course, they're holding signs that say abolish ICE. They're actually going to start marching, which they've been doing throughout the afternoon. We'll walk with them. You're hearing them chant the name Renee Good. You're seeing signs that say abolish ICE. One sign calling for the president to be put in jail. These are the kind of protests we're seeing across the country in cities like Seattle, Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., of course, here in New York and Minnesota. This is what happens when the American people feel as though they've just witnessed some kind of injustice. These Democratic-led cities tend to band together to start protesting in this way. There's one other thing these cities have in common, besides the fact that they're Democratic-led. They've also mostly all been targets of ICE operations similar to what we've been seeing in Minnesota. So again, we're going to walk with this group here, and just to set the scene for you a little bit here, right now we're leaving Foley Square. This area of Lower Manhattan is where a lot of the courts are. They're going to walk up the block here around this building right here. This is where federal immigration court is. There's an entrance on the other side of this building that is specifically an entrance for ICE agents. And by the way, the NYPD walking alongside these protesters. You can see these barricades here blocking the way for these protesters to walk safely. A lot of these NYPD officers blocking the streets so they can cross. So again, this is just one example of what we see in these cities when something like this happens. And the anger is not just for Renee Good, but it's for the moments leading up to it. Take a listen.
ICE is conducting a reign of terror in American cities that is violence against hard-working immigrants and now just American citizens trying to defend people in their community. It's a reign of terror. It's got to stop.
It could happen anywhere. We don't want to be the next Minnesota. We want to support them even though we are far away. We want them to know that we stand with them.
So we're going to see protesters here likely throughout the rest of the early evening and tomorrow as well. Again, primarily staying here in Lower Manhattan, where federal immigration court is, and again, a couple blocks away from City Hall. Alex?
In fact, that last woman with whom you spoke and portrayed for us, she's there showing solidarity with all that's happened there in Minnesota. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Laura Hafley in New York. Let's go from there now to Washington and another protest against ICE happening right now. We'll bring in MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner. So, Akayla, what are we hearing from the president about the shooting in Minneapolis and the investigation? And just to let everyone know what we're seeing, we are looking at Washington, D.C. footage right now of a protest going on.
Alex, President Donald Trump, along with members of his administration, have claimed that the ICE officer in question, Jonathan Ross, was acting in self-defense when he shot those fatal shots, killing Renee Good. The president specifically accused Good of, quote, violently, willfully, and viciously running over Ross. And he said that just within hours of this shooting happening. And just 30 minutes ago, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt posted on X that this woman was, quote, not an innocent mother dropping off her child at school. She claimed that she was a leftist insurrectionist. All of these claims have been coming out without a formal investigation, and according to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, there was originally an agreement for this to be a joint investigation with the FBI and local officials, but they were informed that that investigation is no longer, and said that was a decision made by the U.S. Attorney's Office. President Trump was asked about that decision. I want you to take a listen.
Do you believe that the FBI should be sharing evidence with state officials in Minnesota?
Well, normally I would, but they're crooked officials. I mean, Minneapolis and Minnesota, what a beautiful place, but it's being destroyed. It's got an incompetent governor, fool. I mean, he's a stupid person.
Now, President Trump there is referring to widespread fraud allegations in Minnesota involving state child care payments. It's something that Vice President Vance also sought to bring attention to when he briefed the press here at the White House. He claimed that Jonathan Ross is covered by, quote, absolute immunity. And as we see these nationwide protests, including here in Washington, D.C., Attorney General Pam Bondi is warning anyone that obstructing, impeding federal enforcement could result in prosecution. But the Department of Homeland Security put it very simply like this, saying on X, if you lay a finger on federal officers or agents, you will, quote, face the full extent of the law. Alex?
Okay, Akayla Gardner from the White House. Thanks, Akayla, for that.